Traditionally, recording, mixing, and mastering have been separate stages of production, often with different engineers taking the helm at each stage. There are some engineers who specialize in capturing live instruments and vocals. Their expertise with setup, miking, tracking, and overdubbing has always been sought after to get the best-sounding tracks down on tape, or disc nowadays. When the mix stage comes along, there are also many engineers who specialize in that specific task. Their particular skill is getting the best blend out of whatever tracks they're presented with, achieving not only lots of musical and production detail, but also a big, bold soundstage that presents all the elements of the arrangement in an exciting and appealing way. And the last stage, mastering, is also traditionally handled by a dedicated engineer, whose knowledge and experience with the overall polishing of the mix provides the final touch for the best, most professional-sounding presentation of the song. Of course, in the modern world, all of these once clear lines have become blurred. This is especially true when it comes to projects done in smaller production facilities and even home-based studios, especially when those projects, as is probably most common nowadays, have to be brought in on a severely limited budget. It's become far more typical for one engineer to wear many hats throughout the production process. Recording, mixing, and mastering, often along with production and even performing, are all tasks that may fall to the same person, for better or worse. Now, in some ways, this can be good. An engineer who sees a project through from start to finish gets to know all the details of the songs, the performances, the tracks, even the processing used at the various stages. This intimate knowledge of the elements of arrangement and production can potentially serve him well at the end, when it comes time to mix all the pieces together and add the final sheen. But it can also be a potential detriment. When someone takes on a lot of roles in production, they really do become intimately familiar with every little detail of every part, every performance, every effect. And this can be a big help when they're sculpting each of these components as individual elements in the mix, getting each track to sound just right. But at both the mix stage and the mastering stage, at some point, what's called for is not intimate familiarity with the minutiae of the recording, but the ability to see the big picture. It's necessary to be able to step back and look at, or listen to, the song as a new listener would, hearing it fresh for the first time. What jumps out, both in a good way and a bad way? What are the inherent musical or lyrical hooks that draw a new listener in, and how can they be brought out in production to ensure that they work their magic as effectively as possible? How are all the parts of the arrangement blending together? Is everything coming through as it should, as it'll best serve the song? These are all key aspects, but sometimes the engineer who's so intimately familiar with all the details of the production may have more than a little trouble stepping back, shaking off that familiarity, and hearing the song with relatively fresh ears when the time comes. It can be surprising how easy it is to miss something really obvious, like a bad note or a flubbed lyric. When you know the parts so well, your brain can subconsciously fill in the missing bits. It knows what should be there, so that's what you think you hear. It's even more difficult to notice when an aspect of the arrangement or production isn't working as well as it should or could. The engineer or mixer tends to hear what he intended a certain part or effect to sound like, rather than how it actually comes across. This tendency to get bogged down in the details is especially critical at the mastering stage. Remember, that's not only the last chance for someone to pick up on these kinds of problems, but also the last chance to anticipate how listeners will react to the production and fix or enhance any aspects that may benefit from a little help. That's why it's traditionally been recommended that, rather than having the recording and mix engineer wear all the hats in turn, the project be handed off at the mastering stage to a dedicated mastering engineer. It's not just that that person might bring to bear their years of experience at the specific task of mastering, which they very well may, and to good effect, but they'll also bring fresh ears to the project. A new, dedicated mastering engineer will be able to react to the mix the way a new listener would, because he'll be a new listener. A reaction the current engineer will have a much harder time emulating, if he can manage to do it at all. Now, this may seem like a relatively trivial point, especially up against the cost of bringing in a specialist for something that you might have all the tools and possibly enough expertise to do yourself. But it's actually an excellent idea whenever possible. You'll often be pleasantly surprised at something a new person, with their fresh set of ears, picks up on or comes up with to help them mix along. Unless the cost or logistics are truly prohibitive, bringing in fresh ears at the mastering stage is definitely worth consideration, whatever the skills of the recording and mixing talent. However, that advice notwithstanding, it may often be the case that you do have to wear that additional mastering hat on top of the other roles you've taken on through the course of production. I've ended up doing it myself many times. If so, I'll go over a few things to watch out for when that multitasking includes the mastering stage in the next video.